Hey, welcome tonight to a conversation that we're having on mental health and mental illness and kind of this whole conversation. And during the whole month of October here, and even part of September, we're talking about things in our life and things sometimes that keep us from growing and producing exactly what God has created us to produce. I believe that you have the soil, you have the right life to produce 30, 60, and 100 times what goes into you, that you are someone who can do wonderful and godly things. And sometimes, though, there's moments, and we talked about this this past Sunday, that there's moments that things get mixed up, specifically in the mental side of our life, and the enemy attacks those things that get mixed up, and he causes loneliness to set in. He tells lies and tricks and deception and set things in motion. And so we want to kind of dispel that and talk about that tonight. I have two wonderful ladies here with me tonight, and so I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and that way you'll know who you're hanging out with here tonight. And so whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
I'm Chelsea Warren. I actually teach psychology on a high school level. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in addiction recovery counseling. I've worked with Celebrate Recovery for a few years. I've also done a lot of just one-on-one counseling with people in the church setting. I've been just working with people through my whole entire life when it came to counseling, because counseling is my heart. Mental health is my heart. Just a little testimony: after being healed from depression at the age of 18, I just felt like God called me into this ministry, and I love it. So I'm glad to be here.
It's awesome.
And I'm Valerie Shera. I'm a family medicine physician here in Enterprise, and I see patients on a daily basis who struggle with depression and anxiety and loneliness, and definitely the more medical side of the condition. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tonight.
Awesome. And I'm just here to moderate and try to learn a little bit. And I want to be very clear. I don't think I bring a lot to this conversation. And so I, like you, I feel like I get to learn during this tonight, and I just kind of engage with it in a different way. And so I've got 9 questions. I don't know that we'll get through all 9, but we're gonna work through this and give what I believe is just gonna be quality for you. And so ladies, how would y'all define, I guess is the correct term, how would you define mental health?
So we're talking from a medical standpoint of mental health, and I'm going to let Chelsea handle more of the counseling side of it. But from a medical side of it, when we talk about mental health, we're talking about things like depression. Into that category falls postpartum depression, which is very real, and a lot of women struggle with that. For a long time, that's been a lot of voodoo, and now we're getting more and more attention on postpartum depression, and that's adjustment disorder, which is when like your wife or your husband or a child suddenly dies, you suddenly get struck with an illness, a tragedy happens, and that period of time after it, where you're struggling with getting things back to a regular normal balance. And then major depression falls in that, where you are constantly in a season of a depression state. Things like anxiety, bipolar disorder, all those fall into mental health as well on a medical side.
I think on the counseling side, it's kind of similar too, but it can be something that's happened traumatic in someone's life that triggers them to feel like they're struggling, such as maybe PTSD, some kind of traumatic event. And it also can be an attack. I believe that it can be a spiritual attack that the enemy could put on somebody, to reminding them of a traumatic event, and it can escalate more and more and more. So I think it's very similar with the medical side. Just with the counseling side, it's more of really focusing on what the individual is dealing with, helping them get through it, process through it. And then also, I believe too, from the biblical side of it, just letting them know that God can heal mentally just as he can physically.
And I think that was the revelation for me a couple of years ago, was that growing up, I guess I always had them in 2 different categories. That mental illness or mental health was different than physical health or physical illness. And I saw them differently. And I know that they are different, but to see them both as illnesses or health I think is a change that we can make and we should make. That it's not, and I think I brought this up to someone the other day. If someone has a broken bone, we don't say, just get over it.
True.
Try harder.
Right.
You don't just try harder when you feel like you're drowning. And
on that same line, we talk about patients who come in with blood pressure or diabetes, but one of the things I'm going to talk about with that patient is lifestyle modification, whether that's like exercise and weight loss and changing diets around, but medicine is also needed in those situations. Oftentimes when we're talking about depression and mental health, everybody thinks we're going to jump straight to medicine, and medicine's the only thing they can do, and that's not the case for sure. Counseling and medicine go hand in hand in this situation. Part of it that we don't get always to see in the medical side of it, but definitely I try and encourage my patients, is medicine and counseling and the spiritual aspect all go hand in hand. It is definitely a triad of working through this.
Absolutely.
Y'all brought something up, both of y'all in different ways there. That you talk about experiences, you talk about a traumatic event, you talk about the loss side of everything. And actually, in my illustration Sunday, I used the term manure. You got to work through the crap, for a better term, and that it is a part of life. And I'll be honest with you, I think there's events that you choose or don't choose based off of things that you do, but there's some things you don't choose. Some things just happen. Some things that you don't have any control over the way they happen. Someone dies of a car crash or something else traumatic happens. You don't get to choose that event. And so I think you have to understand that there's going to be experiences, and the way you handle them will either produce life in you or produce a lot of stink in your life, one or the other. And so that kind of defined mental health there. Why is it important, and why do you two ladies think it's important that the church talks about this? Because growing up, we didn't talk about this.
Right.
Up until, I'll be honest with you, 4 years ago, when we did walk through something in my personal life with my family, that this became something even more real and to be dealt with. But why do you think it is important for the church to talk about this?
I also teach history, so I found this very fascinating that long time, way back into the Western church, they saw mental health as demonic possession.
Wow.
If somebody was mentally ill, it could have been dealing with schizophrenia or something was wrong. They saw it that it was demonic, possession. Therefore, we need to, they'd actually drill holes in their skull to try to release the demons out. So they were thinking that was wrong, when they would just, put them down, because they would think that they were, ruining the town and could cause issues. So I think that mental health was always they were scared to do it because they didn't understand what it was. And I think that the church is kind of still in that setting. They don't understand it. There's not a good foundation to really dig deep into it and understand really what is mental health. How can we reach people? We see too many people in the church committing suicide. I think I saw something last year that the wife of a pastor committed suicide, and that broke my heart. That should not be happening, but there is a lack of communication with it because we don't want to talk about it. We're not used to talking about our emotions. We hold it in, we'll deal with it later, we'll deal with it on our own, and we just sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away. So
I could point to two different stories, three different stories that I can remember over the last couple of years. One was this year of the pastor's wife who was dealing with some mental illness from the, I believe she was in the Midwest, and she was driving back to actually Alabama to be with some family. And on the way, she went missing for several days. They couldn't find her, and they did find that she had locked herself inside of a container and the carbon monoxide, or I think it is, that poison. And that was just this year, near the middle of COVID, that we dealt with it. There was a pastor out in California just a few years ago, and his wife is, and I cannot remember her name, but she's been speaking to this because he had battled it, and he actually had taken a sabbatical and gotten help, and everything seemed to be fine. and then he preached. He actually come back and they told their testimony on Sunday, and he committed suicide on Friday, and left, several boys. So she's been talking about this, and God's given her testimony. But man, it's been a battle, and I think you're right. We don't talk about the suicide side inside the church. It is an issue.
I think for the pastor side of it too is we forget that the pastor is also a person. A pastor is an individual, a human. They need somebody they can answer to, and they feel that if they come to somebody with this issue, then they're going to see it as less than, or they're going to see it as not able to run a church. And it's just sad. We've got to get back to understanding it. So
I think the other side of that is for so long, and even at times we still hear that, oh, I'm a Christian, I can't deal with depression.
Right.
Like, Jesus is supposed to be my source of joy and my source of strength and my source of happiness. And if I'm a true Christian and if I'm truly following him, then I'm not going to deal with depression. And that's not the case.
Right. Yep.
Just because you are happy some days, and just because you are following Christ and living a life fulfilled for him, and just because you're serving him, does not mean that depression is not going to affect your life.
Because, and it goes back to, if we think and believe the truth that both our illnesses, physical and mental, are truly ill, you can deal with illness in both aspects of it, then you don't go, well, you broke an arm, so you must not be saved today.
Right.
You must not have the joy of the Lord if you have cancer, and that's not true. And so I think we need to take that stigma away. I did want to share a few statistics before we dive in any more, and some of the, even related to where we are with the pandemic. And it said, even this was before the pandemic, nearly 20% of American adults will have a diagnosable mental health issue in a calendar year. So 20% of adults in the United States will have some type of issue in a calendar year. And so I think, in the context of our church, we have about 100 total people that's a part of our church now. That's about 65 or 70 adults, and then 30 teenagers and kids. I think about that context, and so if 1 in 5, so 20%, that's something. Then, you think about that ratio inside the church.
Right.
You go, wow, we should probably be talking about this more. Another one, it said 46% will have a mental health illness or issue in their life. So 46% of adults in the United States will. Half will do it by the age of 14. They'll have their first issue. And so I don't think it's something that we can just regulate just to Sunday mornings. I think this is something we have to talk about in student ministry and begin dealing with at an earlier age.
A lot of times teenagers kind of get passed over in the depression realm because it's always this thought of, oh, well, they're teenagers. They're supposed to be moody. They're supposed to be figuring out life. They're supposed to, get upset about school. And there is definitely a realm of it that is a normal teenage emotion and drama that goes into that. But there are times where this definitely affects teenagers, and we see that it affects them later on in life to a greater extent. We also see that teenagers who battle depression are more likely to engage in premarital sex, who are more likely to experiment with drugs and alcohol and other things that we see out in the more secular world.
So this statistic points to the pandemic specifically, and it says 40% of adults report having a mental health crisis or a substance abuse issue since the pandemic started back in March. 40% of adults in America. And so bring that back in again, inside of our church, just our church. You think 40%, so 40% of 70, you're talking about, 30, almost around 30 people that you could say. Now, I know that I'm not saying exactly 30, but I'm saying if you play the statistics game. And so, again, to say that 2020 has brought on a lot of things, I think it should have brought on the idea that this is something the church has to deal with.
Well, going back to the 40% of adults deal with some type of depression, when you think about it, when you say, okay, I know 10 people, and you list 10 people in your life, yourself, your spouse, your 2 grown kids, your 2 parents, your best friend, her spouse, his best friend and his spouse, that's 10 people. 4 of you in that circle are likely to struggle with depression and anxiety. And it doesn't get talked about, and you can be great support for each other. You just have to be open and say, hey, I'm struggling in life, and you talk to people.
You know, I have several friends now, but I can remember 5 years ago not having the friendships and the I had friendships. I don't want it to sound bad, and no offense to anyone that I was close to, but I didn't have other lead pastors that I could call and go, I have a struggle, I have a battle, I have something I face. And I think ultimately, we'll get to a little bit more of kind of helping walk through some of these things in a minute, but if you don't have the people around you, it becomes way more difficult. And in the enemy loves loneliness, and he loves to attack in that loneliness and everything. So why do you, and I want to dig into this a little bit, why do you think there is a stigma? I know we talked about the back in the early years of history of the church, but why do you think in today's world there's still a stigma around mental health? I mean, because you think about it, it's talked about now. If you turn on the TV, it's on our TV shows, it's in our movies, it's in our culture now. So why do you think the church has stayed on the outside of this thing and still remains to be a stigma?
I think the church may see it as a secular issue. I think they think that if you have certain types of depression, that's because you're in the world. Kind of like you said, that they automatically assume you got Jesus, you're good.
Wow.
And I think that's an assumption that needs to be taken out. Yes, we have Jesus, we have the Holy Spirit inside of us, but we're human. We are human individuals. And the enemy is going to throw darts. He's going to try to take us out. Like you said, he loves loneliness. He's going to try to take us to a point to where we feel like we are alone. And there's a reason that, Christ, God said, I am with you and will never leave you nor forsake you. That's something we remember, but it is hard as humans to think we're dealing with a hard time. There's something that we've dealt with. We've dealt with depression. We're hurting. We're lonely. We don't even want to be here anymore. We're at such a low place that we feel like we can't get out of it. That's at that moment that we have to stand strong, but we can't stand by ourselves. Yep. We have to have somebody that can help us, lift us up. Thankfully for me, I had such great support, and that's the reason I feel like, I was pushed to that point that I received, that God was able to heal me through that process. And I just feel like the church has got to stop that assumption that you got Jesus, you're good, you're fine. Like you said, you should have joy, you should have peace, patience, kindness, all that.
So let's dig into that then. How do we change the assumption?
I think it's just going to take for the church to really have a passion to get educated on mental health. If that means you bring somebody in, hire somebody on your staff, maybe teach, maybe classes, teach your congregation about it, teach youth, young people about it. Don't be afraid to, like what you're doing, I think is amazing. Don't be afraid to do a series on it, teach about it.
Yeah, I do think, and I have this thing even in the world we live in with other issues, that, and I'll tell friends of mine who have children now that how we solve the issues isn't going to be on social media, but it's going to be in how we raise our children. We change history by the generation that we raise, and the generation that we teach, and the generation that we train, whether that be in our vocational way or whether that be in our own household. I think we all have a responsibility as we go through life to be a part of the change.
I think the other part of that is realizing that church is not a place to throw judgment. And so many times I feel like people are afraid to come forward and say, I'm struggling with depression, or I'm struggling with anxiety or suicidal thoughts, because they're afraid of the judgment that's going to come out of it.
In some churches, they do get judged.
Yeah.
They'll get straight up told, well, you need to go get help.
Yeah.
When they're trying to get help.
Yeah.
The church should be the place where they can come and say, hey, I need help. I need to talk to someone. What can we do to bridge that gap to understand the church is a safe zone for them.
You know, that kind of points to so many different thoughts, and my mind runs like 100 mile an hour in conversations like this. So how do you do this? How do you do that? And so in that conversation there, and as a part of that, how do you then shift the mindset if the church is going to be a judgment-free zone? How do you convince people that it is?
By showing love. When they come in, making them feel welcome, realizing that we are a different place. And I think doing things like this where we're actually talking about it and saying, hey, you know, that's something we talk about, and that's something that we have teachings on. And, you know, let us get you some of that material. Let's show you where those videos are. How can we show you like some of the Christian books that deal with anxiety and depression, having those resources available to them.
And I would lean into the idea that it's one person at a time.
Yes, absolutely.
It takes being light to one person, and light spreads, hope spreads. And so if one person receives that help, that hope, then they're like, oh, when I run into somebody, hey, I know exactly how to walk through this. I may not have it all together, but I know who was there for me.
Right.
And I think the church has, as a whole, not just Connect, but the church as a whole has to get back to the next one. It's always, if you go back to scripture in the parable about the 99 and the one, Jesus went after the one. And so I want to let you know tonight, if you're walking through something, then that's why we're having this conversation. And we'd love to be a part of that journey with you. We may not have every answer, but I can tell you this, you won't have to fight what you're fighting alone, and you won't have to go about it by yourself. There's people around you. There's people here for you that wants to walk through the journey. Because let me tell you something, we're better together than we are apart. Anyone that thinks that they can do it by themselves has bought into the lie of the enemy. You're not supposed to do it by yourself. You're supposed to do it together. That being said, kind of transition the idea, is mental health, and we talked about this, prior to going on video tonight. Is mental health, do you think, a physical event with a spiritual side effect, or do you think it's more of a spiritual event with a physical side effect?
I actually thought a lot about this since we kind of talked about it before service or before this, and I really do see both sides of it. We know from a medical standpoint that it is a disease. It is affecting the neurotransmitters in your brain, which help regulate your mood. So we know that given medicine to treat that is absolutely the physical or the medical side of it. I believe spiritually, we also struggle with that. I like to tell patients, this is where we kind of like live. This is our normal, happy, healthy life where we're experiencing a wide range of emotions. And that can be like you're happy and you're sad and you're upset and you're angry and you're ecstatic and joyful. And all those emotions are part of a normal, healthy life. And over time, things come in and start robbing us of that. And a lot of times that's a traumatic event. That's the loss of a spouse. That's maybe substances we're using that we shouldn't. And you begin to lose some of that. And you are on this like trajectory. Well, spiritually, the devil comes in and definitely starts playing a part of that. And he starts pulling away those things. He starts pulling away your support system. He starts pulling away those relationships you have with your friends and your spouse. He starts putting in thoughts of self-doubt and you can't do this and you're not worth anything and Christ doesn't love you, your family doesn't love you, and you're just constantly believing that, and this is going further and further and further down. And so you hit eventually this rock bottom and you don't know what to do. And that's when thoughts of like suicide and maybe I'm not supposed to be here and things start taking root in your head. And again, the devil's just piling it on. So now you're compounding a physical problem and a spiritual problem, and it is almost blown out of control. It can absolutely start with the devil starting putting in doubts, but I feel like for the most part, we start seeing some physical things, and he feeds off of that and exacerbates a problem.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I feel like, and even there, you can put in the side of even genetic. They say that, there are mental health conditions that can be genetic, that people can pass on. But absolutely, I mean, everything you said, that's right on. And the enemy, he knows where to hit.
Yeah.
He knows what to pinpoint. He knows what buttons to push exactly to make it, like you said, more and more to where they hit that rock bottom.
I think sometimes we give the enemy a lot of credit in the fact that I go back to the Garden of Eden, and I've always wondered this question: how many times did Eve pass by the tree before she took a bite of the fruit? Because Scripture doesn't say; it just says one day, he asked the right question, basically, and so when it comes to a habit standpoint and a lifestyle standpoint, I believe that you have to make choices, even when you're facing the mental side or the physical, the actual, like you said, neurotransmitters, that side. I'm going to have to make habit choices that keep the enemy out of the playground. Because he's going to mix up whatever he can mix up. And so if you keep passing by there, and if he can slip, and this is the way the enemy works, if you pass by there today, he may not slip a lie in today. He may just slip in something that's a partial, a partial truth is a lie. I don't want to mistake that. But he may slip in something that is bathed in enough truth to get you to buy in.
Absolutely. I think too, like PTSD is a great example. Somebody who's been, through a traumatic event. We see a lot with, soldiers but anybody, even, a woman who was abused or anything like that, or, a man who, dealt with something throughout his life. The enemy sees that they're already in a state, and that's when you see the next step.
Yeah.
They turn to substance abuse to try to drown that thought, to try to get rid of those memories, to try to, push them away.
Yeah. And
then move to maybe another substance, and then it just keeps getting worse and worse.
I think it was John Maxwell that said we have uphill dreams and downhill habits.
Yeah.
And so too oftentimes, it's kind of like the snowball effect. When, like you were saying, one way and it starts piling up and it starts going downhill, and the way gravity pulls anything that's going down, it's going to pull at a greater force, And so I think that is a real side effect, a real deal there.
Before we move on to the next question, we was talking about the analogy where you're like here and then everything kind of falls and you wind up here. Well, getting back to here is not an overnight.
Wow.
Is not going to happen overnight. It doesn't matter like what medicine we start you on. It doesn't matter if you go to one counseling session. It doesn't matter if you talk to one friend.
Yeah.
That doesn't put you back here. It is a stepwise process. It is a journey getting back up here, and it takes time. You didn't get here overnight. You're not going to get back to here overnight. And I think so many people, especially when they come to the doctor and they go to counseling, they're like, "Oh, one session's going to take care of this, and I'm going to be back to like my previous self or what I consider my healthy self like tomorrow," and that is not the case. It is a journey, and for some people it is a lifetime journey of things that they're going to have to like walk through and talk through and process.
Yeah, that's a golden moment right there of this video is that reminder that if the whole saying is Rome wasn't built in a day,
right?
And so you have to remember, and I go back to the idea, the belief, and I don't exactly remember how Rick Warren said it, but he said if when God wants to grow a dandelion or a mushroom, you'll walk outside, definitely in Alabama here, you'll walk outside one night and there'll be nothing in the yard. You walk out the next morning and these mushrooms that grow in the yard, and there's like 10 of them there, and you're like, how? And so if God wants to grow a mushroom, he does it almost instantaneously in a moment, but when he's trying to grow an oak tree, he'll do it over 40 years.
Yep.
And we have to remember our life isn't the sum total of one moment, one day, but it's the sum total of many days, of many moments, and that anything worth having and worth growing and worth producing in our life is worth the journey. Don't quit on the journey because there is a difficult moment and you have a battle, you have an illness, you have an issue. Actually, I would say the opposite. Lean into it. lean in and walk through that thing and battle through that thing and get people around you and because you want to get going back uphill. That leads to the next question. Does mental illness or mental health keep you from serving God? Not serving God is not the correct term, because I don't think that's kind of leads to you can't be a Christian yet, but being used by God, I guess. Does a mental health issue or mental illness keep you from being used by God in ministry or in your daily life?
Absolutely not. I mean, unless you're going through something at that very moment and you need, that counseling, God can use you no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And like I said, I have a testimony of going through mental health, and I feel like that God can take what you went through and use it for you to help other people,
yeah.
to minister to other people. So.
I just want to echo something Chelsea said there. You can absolutely be used by God to reach out to those around you and help them through situations. But if you're in the midst of a storm and you are fighting to survive and you're fighting to keep the water out of your boat, sometimes adding on a leadership position and thinking, oh, I'll get the water out of my boat faster when it's sinking if I'm telling other people. Sometimes you got to take that season and take care of you.
Absolutely.
And not take care and not try and add on all these other tasks. You wind up sinking the boat a lot faster that way. So especially I feel like pastors and youth pastors and those in leadership in the church get to that mindset, well, I can't step away from this and I can't take a break because it's not going to get done if I'm not here. And so they get to that season where they're done. They have nothing left to give. They are sinking, and yet they're still trying to lead from that point of sinking, when in reality, we as the church and we as a leadership team need to be able to say, look, I realize you're sinking. How about we give you a couple Sundays or a couple months or whatever you need, and let's help you out of that so you can be a better use.
Right.
It's better to dock the boat during winter than it is to sink the ship in winter. And so if you go back through history, and they would often dock during certain seasons, stormy seasons or whatever. And so you have to, as a leader, and if there's any pastors that are watching this and getting involved in this video, maybe you're watching it at a later time, what I would say to you is don't think that your ship is bigger than the whole story. Your ship's not going to affect the whole ocean. It's better to bring it in for a season and rest and recharge. Listen, I actually had a staff member a couple weeks ago remind me that we're just a little over a year away from us taking, me and Emily taking a little over a month off. That's the rule, is after you've been a part of the leadership at Connect for 7 years, you get so many weeks off in a row to a sabbatical, a break, and where you're not allowed to show up. You have to dock and be ministered to, and you have to. You're not going during those 4, 5, 6 weeks. You're not going and preaching and going ministering somewhere. You're going to get ministered to. You're getting fed and taking that sabbatical time. And I was like, oh yeah, praise the Lord, that's coming up too. But no, seriously, I think it's important as a church, as a staff, as a leadership, that we take into account. And I pray that your staff, if you serve in a leadership position, they take that serious and take the mental health serious. And I think from that perspective, I think that you have to know the season, because there's moments in the journey that you need to grab a hold of purpose to keep walking.
Agreed.
And then there's other moments in the journey where you know that you need to rest and reestablish and recharge. You're no good to anyone if the batteries are dry.
Right. That's true.
Man, you guys are doing so well. I'm just so impressed. And okay, just a couple of questions. When should a person seek help? At what point in the journey? We talked about a statistic earlier. 1 in 5 adults in America will have a battle every year. Have that moment where it could be an issue. So, at what point along the journey do you go, "Hey, I need help"?
You definitely need to get help right away as soon as possible. Never let it sit. Never think, "Oh, I'll be okay." If you notice that you're feeling that you need help, you need to get help. You need to talk with somebody, even if you're going through a hard time because you maybe lost somebody or anything. Get help right away. I mean, never wait. You you always just do that.
So can I throw out a kind of an idea behind that? And that is, could it be that we need to be a little bit more proactive on that side? And on the physical side, I'm supposed to take a checkup. She made me come in a couple weeks ago and have a checkup, just check all my numbers and make sure. Could it be that we need to have people in our life that we can check up with regularly, whether that be a counselor? And I think it was Stephen Furtick, I think we have one of his books talks about this, that he actually started attending a counselor there was no problem. He just went just to make sure. One of our staff members mentioned this to me the other day. He just went to just kind of keep that checkup. That way, if anything ever did pop up, he's there and it's noticeable then. Yeah. And so I think the same way we do physical, we do the checkups, we watch our numbers, we watch things specifically. If we did that on the mental side, how much different that would be.
Absolutely.
And I think part of that goes back to, I'm amazed at how many people will come in and say, like, even just in conversations I have out in public, will say, oh, I don't think I'm struggling with depression, but I'm sleeping 12 hours a day and I wake up and I move from the bed to the couch and I feel so fatigued and I don't want to play with my kids anymore and I don't want to go out with my friends anymore, but it's just a season and I'm happy. I'm still happy. Like, I love my husband and I love my kids. I'm still happy, so I'm not depressed, but I'm eating everything in the house, or I'm not eating anything at all, or maybe I'm not sleeping at all. I'm only sleeping a couple of hours a night, or I'm just people are starting to notice something wrong, but I don't really think anything's wrong. I'm really, really fine. Having those people in your life that say, wait, stop. Let's talk about what depression really is. Let's talk about those things you just told me, and let's get you in to see somebody and let them evaluate, because depression doesn't look the same in everybody.
Right.
Depression looks very different, can present very different, have very different signs. You and your best friend or you and your sister may both be struggling with depression and look completely different. And that's where a counselor, that's where a physician, that's where people are going to be able to say, okay, let's walk through this in a mechanical, real physical, tangible way and talk about what's really going on.
I think too, they get into that setting and they may get into that counseling session, and they, the counselor, the person talking to them may start, going through some things. Let's go through your life. Let's see what we see. And then something comes up, and they're like, oh, and they start feeling these feelings that they're holding on to, and then they start feeling again. They're like, okay, I didn't even realize that was something I was still holding on to, dealing with. So it may be there, you just don't realize it. Like you said, I'm good, I'm happy, I'm not struggling with it, but it's there. So.
I find that I dig more things out in my life when I'm having conversations with people about what I'm walking through, than just saying, hey man, this is going on, and then something comes up and you're like, I didn't know I felt that way, but it's something, there's something moving inside of you in those moments.
And I think those moments too allow the Holy Spirit to move, because He is He's the great counselor. He brings it out. He'll say, let's pinpoint this part, and it brings that healing, and as it comes out, it comes to light. Yeah. And then God can heal it, and the enemy no longer can, really try to work on it. So
well, let's be honest about it. That's what this is all about, bringing this to light.
Yeah.
And because we don't want anything to be hidden, and we don't want anything to be in the shadows or in the darkness, because things in the darkness do not produce life. Things in the light do. And I believe this can be one of those moments. You mentioned something just a moment ago about the kind of some of the signs. Well, I'm not battling with it, and that's part of mine and Emily's story. Is I had no idea. I believe just working 55, 60 hours a week, pastoring the church, everything going on. It was right after Asher was born. Her mom had passed away, and Emily's told her testimony before, but her mom had passed away. She had a child, had the postpartum side, but also there was that separation, that traumatic event that happened in her life. And I got to realizing it, looking back, she wasn't sleeping. I'd wake up 5-6 nights a week, and definitely, at that point we've been married, 7 or 8 years, 7 years, I think. And so if you're used to someone being in the bed and they're not, you start waking up going, hey, they're not here. And now looking back, I'm like, man, that was a major sign, and kind of feel like I failed that moment because you should have said, hey, wait a minute, there's got to be a reason that you can't seem to sleep and then you're fatigued all day. And so I think knowing some of those signs and knowing you kind of what to look for, and the people closest to you are going to be the ones that know those things.
I think too, because I teach in the high school setting, teenagers, and we have a thing when they know it too. They have to watch what they say, because if they say something, even if they're joking, like, oh, I just want to kill myself or blah 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 blah. They're trying to be funny. Immediately, I'm like, you're going to the counselor, because you say something like that. I don't care if you're joking or not.
Yeah.
And they've learned. You're going downstairs to the counselor because I ain't playing
going downstairs.
So I think, how much more does a church really need that kind of awareness?
Yeah.
We do it in the school systems. We watch the kids. We make sure that they're okay, they're safe, they're not dealing with, they're not going to come in and try to hurt anybody in the school, hurt themselves. Why can't we do that in the church?
Wow. So good.
I think one other stigma we probably need to deal with, I think more from the medical side of it, is people think, oh, once I'm diagnosed with depression or anxiety, then I'm going to have to be on medicine the rest of my life. And I don't want to do that, because I don't want to be on medicine all the time. And that is not the case for every person. There may be times where you need to be on medicine, but there may be times where you can talk to a physician and come off of medicine once things begin to stabilize out in your life. You have the medicine and you kind of get those neurotransmitters back where they need to be, and you've been to counseling and y'all talked through and processed and broken down some of those things that's causing you the anxiety, or that's being the suppressive of that mood. And maybe you weren't in church and you got in church and you definitely found some peace and joy in Christ, and things start to balance out in your life. You can definitely, with the help of your family medicine or anybody's physician, work on coming off of that medicine. It is not a lifetime stigma, for sure.
But don't quit cold turkey. That was one thing I remember.
Please do not quit cold turkey.
Yeah.
That
I don't remember exactly how to explain, but basically, you go from all this falling in to nothing falling in, and then it just jacks everything up, makes it worse.
Yeah.
So,
please do not quit cold turkey.
how do I take the next step? How does someone take the next step? What, if you're giving advice to someone and you say, hey, this is what you need to do, this is the step that you need to take, how do you start working on it? What's step one?
It goes back to the three things we talked to at the beginning. They all kind of go hand in hand together, and they kind of go in any order, but I would definitely say counseling, whether that's with a psychologist, psychiatrist type counselor, whether that's with a Christian counselor, whether that's with your pastor. I know a lot of pastors do that type of counseling. There's definitely counseling, and then there's definitely getting the evaluation from a medical doctor. There are absolutely medical conditions that feed into depression and anxiety and exacerbate those symptoms, and those need to be taken care of as you're treating anxiety and depression. So that is a big part of it. And then perhaps the biggest part of all is the spiritual battle that goes on, and that's where you get plugged into a church. You get plugged in with a group of believers who will pray over you and be there supportive of you. So I think all three of those definitely go hand in hand.
Totally agree. Yes, definitely. I mean, seek counseling, like you said, even from a church setting or from a counselor, but definitely, from your physician, get help. Don't just sit and think, oh, it'll pass, it's fine. My mother went through it, grandmother, whatever. They dealt with it. It's genetic. I might as well just get used to it. Don't do that. Seek help. If you need somebody to talk to somebody. Reach out to somebody, and do not feel that you're less than because you are dealing with it. Everybody, like you said, there's a lot of people that struggle with mental health. It is popular, which I hate saying that, but get help. Just talk to somebody. I think talking it out, you'd be surprised how much really helps too.
Yeah. I think what I hear both of you say there, in combination, is don't go at it alone. Right. Step one, you got to find somebody. You got to deal with that, and it doesn't make you less human. It doesn't make you less Christian. It doesn't make you less anything. Right. And we don't look at a 10-year-old that breaks his arm and go, man, you're less of a human because you break your arm.
Right.
And so we got, get rid of that stigma that you're less than.
And I think I want to talk to people who may see somebody dealing with it. Don't assume that they're okay if they say I'm fine. Because they're going to say that. They'll say I'm fine, I'm good, thanks for checking, I'm fine. But you don't have to like push them and bother them and bug them. But do say, I'm going to hold you accountable. If you don't go get help soon, then me and you are going to go get help. We're going to figure out a way that we can get you help. Don't leave them, to just decide on their own. So.
Yeah, when we dealt with it in our family, I made a phone call to Emily's sister, her older sister, and said, "Hey, I need you to help me get her.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I need you to help me help her get help."
Yeah.
And
that person may get mad at you, but they'll get over it.
Right. Well, and I'll be honest with you, I'd rather have someone mad for 5 minutes,
right? Exactly.
than do something that long term you regret.
Yes.
And so I think that was going actually our last question tonight was how do I help someone that is struggling? And I want to point out, you said, ask them. And sometimes you don't have to ask about the issue to begin with. Sometimes it's the engagement in the conversation. And you'll be surprised as you engage with someone, they'll feel more comfortable, they feel they can trust you, and they go, you know what, I've really been dealing with this or dealing with that.
It's easier than you think. You may come up to somebody and they have not had anybody talk to them, and you just literally, genuinely, you care, and you wrap your arm around them and say, are you okay? And they break down because they haven't had anybody to really talk to them, and they just finally have somebody and they feel that love. So, sometimes it may be easier.
The other part of that is don't be afraid to share your story. If you've struggled with anxiety or depression or mental illness and you are now in a better place and you see somebody struggling with it, they don't just go blurt it all out. But in that conversation with them, say, hey, I see you struggling. Let me tell you about my struggles. Let me tell you about what I've walked through. Sometimes having that person that says, you can beat this, you can overcome this, you can walk through it, makes the world of difference.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Could I argue tonight that the thing that the church has not done is we've not told our testimony about mental health, therefore we've not overcome it in the church?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's so many people I think in the church that have a testimony when it comes to overcoming mental health, and it needs to be said. I mean, no matter what, it needs to be said. You need to share your story because you could save someone's life. You really could.
And so, the scripture says in Revelations, we've overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And I want to encourage you, if you have a story to tell, be willing to have a testimony to somebody, no matter what that is, but specifically with the conversation tonight on mental health and mental awareness. And that is to tell your story, be willing to say, you know what, this happened, this is what I walked through, this is how I got help. And I think it means the world to somebody else. Ladies, y'all have anything that you want to add?
I think if you are struggling with anything, please reach out to somebody, one of us or your pastor, anybody, friend that you may have. We would love to talk to you, help you in any way, anything. So.
I think this has been a fantastic conversation.
Yes.
And thank you, ladies, so much for doing this. Thank you for being a part of helping people walk through it. And I think this is just, again, the beginning stages of being able to walk with people and see more testimonies. And if anything else, we want to see more testimonies. And so with that being said, we hope you guys have a good night, and we hope to see you on Sunday.